You know, absolutely. There's nothing I enjoy more than looking at a person and putting them in a situation and making them ask in angst out loud, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know if you've ever done that to somebody or put them in that position, but recently, in the not too distant past, Garrett Abeda, again, the other one, good looking one, and then me, we're on staff, and so we found like this little squirrel, like a lawn gnome kind of squirrel that you're supposed to put like in your front yard. We just found it here on the property. No one was clearly using it, and it kind of just didn't belong. And so we spray painted it gold and then started handing it around to staff members at our church saying, you get the Golden Squirrel of Achievement Award, like for no reason. Like you just get it, and we do it at a staff meeting, and it's super fun. And I love giving people something that makes them go, what am I supposed to do with this, right? Like, would you want a random golden squirrel right now brought to you? Just like, here it is. Behold, right? This little chipper squirrel. He's like, he's like smiling. It's such a funniest looking squirrel. We love it. And I love making people ask that question. Do you remember when you were a kid and the first time you went to art class and the teacher handed you a clump of clay? Do you remember that feeling of like, what am I supposed to do with this, right? That could be out of angst and like, or out of excitement. What am I supposed to do with this, right? Do you remember what it felt like as a kid? You had to get your hands wet and your hands would get all like colored by the clay, and eventually you put it in a kiln. Everyone's making a cup for their mom. You know what I mean? Like we all got that moment of excitement. We got this clay. It's like, what are we supposed to do with this? Do you remember your first paycheck? Do you remember the first time you got paid for doing a job? Maybe some of you, when you were a kid, your dad allowed you to do some work and he paid you. I remember my first paycheck wasn't really a paycheck, but it was at a water store. My grandma and grandpa owned a water store in Phoenix because, believe it or not, you can sell people water and ice in Phoenix. They're desperate for it. It's crazy. They just buy cubes of ice and sit on it. It's so crazy. But they owned a water store, and I remember getting paid cash, not even a paycheck, super tax legal, I'm sure. And they just handed me something because I would bag ice for them, and I remember as a kid just thinking, it's only like $30, but like, what am I gonna do with this? What am I supposed to do with this, right? And there's some very important people in the room, I'm sure, be like, well, Garrett, if I were you, I would have opened a savings account, and you gotta start thinking about where that money's gonna go when you're dead for your family. It's like, easy, right? It's $30. Like as a kid, what do you do with it? You go spend it on chocolate and movies, Do you remember that time? Maybe it's happened recently when a teacher or your boss gave you this massive project, a project that you have no idea how you're going to solve and complete by the deadline. Syllabus day in college, they tell you when all the projects are due. It's August, and you're like, it's due in November, and you're like, I got plenty of time, right? Or there's the version of us, there's other people who they got syllabus day and they've already texted 12 people in their group about, we'll establish this time and this meeting will be 3 times a week. I'll be in charge of sending us all of our communications, right? Every one of us is a different personality. What am I supposed to do with this? Recently, in my life, had a baby. She's 6 months old, and 6 months ago, I'm in a delivery room, and they just pulled this baby out of my beloved wife, and here you go. What am I supposed to do with this, right? Maybe you say that still about your kids. They're teenagers. What am I supposed to do with this, right? What do we do with it? And they just give you this child and they just you trust me with this child? But we all know, the thing we're talking about here over and over again in so many ways is influence. You and I have influence over everything and everyone and every space in our life. Sometimes by our attitude, we can create an atmosphere in a room. Am I right? See what you just did? You just created an atmosphere in this room. I asked you a question and you looked at me like I had a lobster crawling out of my ear, right? Right? There you go. You have influence. If someone else in the room had said, right, yep, amen, you might have done it too. Oh, right? That's influence. Every day, every single day is another opportunity to have influence on something or someone. I want to tell you a story. In the Bible, probably in my opinion, one of the best stories you can find in the Old Testament. That part of the Bible that's really weird, full of violence and bloodshed. It's like a soap opera drama thing. And it's very hard to read because it's very old, but in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, everyone say the word Genesis. In Genesis, there is this story that's at the end of Genesis about a man named Joseph. This story, in my opinion, is the ultimate like soap opera of the Bible. It is unbelievable, and it contains, to me, such a powerful message of influence. For example, Joseph, the way his story starts is he's one of many brothers, lots of brothers, okay? Now his dad, kind of weird, we gotta acknowledge it. Jacob is his dad. Everyone say the name Jacob. Jacob is Joseph's dad, and Jacob had a few wives. You know, like they're just auditioning for a new season of Sister Wives, right? So that's just Old Testament for you. That's just everyday business. And Jacob's favorite wife, nothing fishy about that sentence, Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel, gave him 2 kids, Joseph and later Benjamin. Now, Jacob loved that wife more than any of his other wives and definitely loved Joseph. Joseph was his prized possession, and he gave Joseph this cool Technicolor coat that everyone loved and really bothered his brothers because, oh man, Jacob loved Joseph. Joseph was the beloved. How many of you have a sibling that can do no wrong in your mother or father's eyes, right? No matter what they do, they're just perfect. Maybe you're that sibling and they all are here around you and they all hate you for it, right? Not to cause any dissension. But really, I mean, there's just this like, oh, they can do no wrong. And that's how Jacob felt about Joseph. And Joseph was quite a character. He was a dreamer. And I don't mean that he had wonderful aspirations for the future. I mean, he literally had dreams that he believed were like gonna come true. God would give him these weird visions or dreams. And he, of course, like a doofus, told his family about them. He would like go up to them. He's like, hey, I had this crazy dream where like all of you bowed down to me and I was like in charge and I had great power and influence. You can imagine how brothers would respond to that kind of a dream. So eventually the brothers were done with this. They were so mad at him. They were so envious of how their father Jacob looked at him. And they said, we're done with you. We're gonna go kill you. A little extreme, but that's how the Old Testament works. And they decide to go kill him. And as brothers do, they're all debating and talking like, well, we can't do that to dad. And they chicken out. They don't have the guts to actually kill him. So they throw him in a pit where he's exposed. He's either inevitably doomed to die of exposure or be sold into slavery to Egypt. And so they leave, they take his colorful coat and they like smear it with blood. And they're like, look, mom and dad, how I can't believe it. He was killed by an animal. Isn't that terrible? What's for dinner? You know, their dad is devastated. Jacob goes into deep grief. He has lost his beloved son. Meanwhile, Joseph is in a pit, and a carrier of like tons of Egyptians full of slaves picks him up, and he's sold into slavery to Egypt. And this begins a story, and I don't have all the time to go into it, but the bottom line is Joseph goes from being a slave in Egypt, and he gets this opportunity to interpret a dream that Pharaoh, the king, the god of Egypt, keeps having. Because remember, pharaohs back then, they weren't just like rulers. They weren't just like a president or a king that like got nominated. No, they thought he was a god among men. And Pharaoh kept having dreams that were haunting him. And Joseph, they brought him in to interpret the dreams, and he interpreted them correctly and saved the nation. The dreams that Pharaoh had were predicting a famine. A famine was about to take the entire land. This entire chunk of the Middle East was going to be swept with all sorts of famine. And so through Joseph, they come up with a plan to stock away and like put away enough food so that everyone in Egypt can survive and then some. Pharaoh looks at Joseph and says, you've saved us all. I promote you to the highest position I can. You're my right-hand man. No one is more powerful than you than me. Joseph, this little dreamer Jewish boy, gets to become this incredible power in Egypt. Why that's significant is because the famine gets so bad. It goes so horribly wrong that all the brothers and Jacob and his family out in the wilderness, the famine has reached their land. And they're starving and they don't know what to do. So all the brothers get together and they say, hey, let's go to Egypt and see if they can give us some of their food they have in stock to save our family. So they leave Benjamin at home. Why? Because Jacob says, if in travel we lose Benjamin, the grief will hit me so hard. If something happens to Benjamin, I won't be able to live any longer. So all of you brothers, you go, but Benjamin stays home with me and mom. right? So the brothers head out, they go to Egypt, and lo and behold, guess who's in charge of all the food distribution? Joseph. They don't recognize him. The brothers don't realize it's him. He must look very different. I mean, last time they saw him, he was very young, but not just that. He is clothed in Egyptian power. I mean, he must have looked like an Egyptian. So they didn't think anything of it. But the problem is, this weird man, this powerful man in Egypt, is asking them a bunch of questions about their family. So Joseph begins to interrogate them, the brothers, not knowing who it is. And he says, hey, I tell you what, I won't make a deal with you. I will not give you any food until all of your brothers are here. So you go back home and bring me Benjamin. And they're like, oh, okay. So they go home, they tell Jacob what's happened. Jacob says, how can this be? What are we going to do? One of the brothers named Judah, everyone say Judah? Judah speaks up and he says, Dad, here's the deal. Whatever happens to Benjamin, it's going to be on me. I promise you, his blood is on my hands. I will take care of him. We have to bring Benjamin. Otherwise, we will die of starvation out here. So he agrees begrudgingly. They take Benjamin with them to Egypt. They arrive. Again, they don't know it's Joseph. Joseph has a feast prepared for all of them. And then as they're eating, Joseph says, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you all your food, your grain, send you back home. But then Joseph does something a little creepy, a little shady, a little bit of, feistiness. What he does is he takes a silver cup from the royal room and he sneaks it in Benjamin's bag to make it look like Benjamin stole a cup from the palace. So on their way back, the brothers are getting their way home. Joseph has sent a troop saying someone has stolen a cup from the palace. They catch them, they find them, they imprison them, bring them back to Egypt, Benjamin and all. And at this point, they're standing in a room, basically like a throne room, where Joseph sits in power before these brothers who have betrayed him, sabotaged his life, ruined him. I mean, they left him for dead. They may as well have killed him. Killing him would have been merciful compared to what he had to endure. And they're before him. And Joseph looks at them, and Judah begins to beg. Listen, his blood, Benjamin's blood is on my head. You don't understand, sir. This is the last son of our father from the wife that he loves. Again, nothing weird about that sentence. And he's like, would you please take my life instead? I'll be your slave forever. Just don't take Benjamin. Our father would surely die of grief. And this is what it says, Genesis chapter 45. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years, there will be no plowing and reaping, but God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father of Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says, God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen. And we all know Goshen. God, I'd love to live in Goshen, right? And be near me, you and your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all that you have. I'll provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your whole household and all you belong to will be destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt and about everything you have seen, and bring my father down here quickly. Can you imagine how long it's been since he's seen his father? Then he threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept. And Benjamin embraced him, weeping, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And afterward, his brothers hung out and talked with him. This story does not end the way it should. What Joseph did with influence was unlike how every story you would expect in the Old Testament to go, right? He was supposed to cut them in half with a giant sword, right? He was supposed to imprison them forever and make them pay every last penny. I mean, this is the Bible after all, right? Isn't it about judgment and fire and brimstone? I find it so interesting that Joseph uses his influence in such an unpredictable way. And by the way, a little footnote here. The Bible begins with the book Genesis. It begins by telling us the story of humanity breaking their union with God and how Cain and Abel, the first brothers, murder each other. And then the story of Genesis ends with a story of other brothers who essentially killed their brother. And in a throne room, so to speak, where the guilty should be condemned and punished, it ends with mercy and forgiveness. Oh, Lord, I'm going to have to say it again, because if someone was listening, there would have been an amen in the house. The story of Genesis ends with a room where the guilty people who should be punished get mercy and forgiveness. Amen. There is, right there, the gospel, the good news. Sometimes I read stuff like this and I go, how did I miss this? You know? Joseph used his influence in such an unpredictable way. Let's talk about influence. Here's what influence is not. Influence is not a promotion. So many people in our world today think that if we just put the right person in the Oval Office, if we just have the right people in a certain position, if we just change leadership, that will be influence. But how often has history taught us that people who have no great position at all, not even good degrees behind their name, have great influence over the world? There's something to be said that influence is not a position, it's not a promotion, it's not something we vote for, it's something that someone has. Also, influence is not being sexy. We assume, I always love when I say the word sexy on stage because 12 heads go. It's so funny to watch you. Hi, well, glad you're here. Everyone always says, why do you always say sexy all the time? I was like, because it's a speaking skill. You just throw it out there and people all of a sudden are listening again. It's sex sells, I guess. Anyways, influence is not being sexy. Because we think people of influence always have people with a certain amount of money, certain clothes, certain hairstyle, a certain position that they have. It's like they're like sexy. That's not for me. Like clearly someone who looks like me. You know what we often do with influence is it just reveals our low self-esteem. We think people like us would never deserve that kind of power and influence. But the truth is, time again, over and over again has taught us. I mean, Mother Teresa wasn't sexy in the eyes of the world. And yet we know exactly, not just her name, but what her name means. Jesus was born a poor man. I was just thinking about how I could finish that sentence like the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin, but I gotta back up. But Jesus was born a poor man, right? In a manger. And he had no influence on the outside. There's no reason. And yet to this day, more books, more paintings, more songs have never been written by anyone else than him. Influence. And lastly, influence is not a magic ring, right? Sometimes we turn influence and we think people who have power and influence are people who are like, well, they were just destined by the powers that be, right? We treat it like a Lord of the Rings movie where if someone has the ring of power, it's like, no. The thing is, sometimes us Christians, we got to be careful. As religious people, we do this the worst. We say, well, that person is just a special gift of leadership. That person just seems to be destined for greatness. Be careful, because that looks an awful lot like us distancing ourselves so that we don't have to feel obligated to use influence like they have. Sometimes we use in the name of spirituality an excuse, say, I don't have influence like them, so I'm off the hook. I don't have to serve. I don't have to give. I don't have to, right? Here's what I think influence could be. I looked it up. Webster says that it's the power or capacity of causing an effect. How inspiring, right? It's a little scientific. It's a little bit stale to me. It looks a little bit too much like a guy in like a laboratory trying to tell us what influence is. So I think what influence really is shaping people around you by choosing to be a certain kind of person. It's when you and I, just by who we are, what we say, what we do, what we don't say, and what we don't do, to shape the atmosphere around us. You and I can change the tone of a room just by our presence. I think influence is what happens when you live like Jesus did. I think when you and I choose to be like Jesus, we have influence. Joseph and his actions clearly point us to Christ well before we knew his name. So what is and why do we do Love 928? Love 928 is our church trying to be a place of influence. Not for any reason other than to serve and to bless and to build a bridge to the community. We feel obligated to serve and to give of our time and our resources to be an extension of this influence that God has allowed all of us to have as a church family. Love 928 is where we take a weekend. Instead of being here singing about Jesus, talking about Jesus, we go act like Jesus. And we build a bridge connecting to people. All of these last 2 years that we've done this, our influence has grown. There's more sites this year than we've ever had where we can go serve and people that we can connect to. And you and I are responsible for that. I want to tell you a story. There was a wonderful woman named Mary Lou. Mary Lou would sit in the back right there, right actually where my friends and my wife are back there. Mary Lou would sit there, and she was the sweetest woman. She'd been diagnosed with cancer, but she fought hard. And that woman, every time she'd see me on stage, she'd come up and she's like, I love it. You're like the Energizer Bunny up there. You're just moving, and she loved it. She just was so sweet. She'd give me a kiss on the cheek, and it was this woman made my day. She made me always want to preach more and better. And she got to participate in our first Love 928. Mary Lou is the woman right there in the far left on the screen with the beanie cap on. And her husband, John, is right there second to the right. And this woman, when she served in Love 928, it was a wonderful thing. She loved it. She came back that next weekend and she found me and she said, Garrett, I just want to tell you why I loved Love 928. I just thought it was so great. Let me tell you what it was. And I interrupted her and I was like, was it seeing me doing manual labor? Like I was trying to have fun with it. And she goes, no. She goes, it was seeing all those young kids from our church together serving. She goes, that gave me such hope for the future. Now, none of our kids in our youth group had any clue who Mary Lou was. And none of them even knew. A lot of them are thinking, well, I painted a wall, I built a fence, and that was the good Jesus work. And yes, it was. But what little did they know that a woman who was not long away from going to meet Jesus, she found hope again because of just people showing up. That is influence. Influence is not a position. It is not trying to be a sexy person with money and power and clothes. And it's certainly not this magical thing. It's something you and I all have. Influence is what happens when we show up and we serve and we give and we just point people back to him. Mary Lou, we had the honor of hosting her service right here, her funeral. And I was so privileged to be in that room and to not just know that she was with Jesus now, but to know that she went there with hope. She didn't go to Jesus going, oh, all those kids these days, the next generation are going to hell in a handbasket, like so many of us often talk like. She went with hope because kids just showed up and served at Love 928. It reminds me of what Jesus said to his disciples in John 13, which is this mandate, this directive, this new covenant he's given us and gives us this direction as a church. A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. All around us are people that may never know how our actions are impacting them and leading them to write a new story. Christ may use you and I next weekend together in an unexpected way. Maybe it is the paint or the fence you build, but maybe it's just you showing up and the right person saw you and it changed them and it moved them. We cannot imagine how Christ is going to use us when we serve together next weekend. So I invite you to be, already as you are, a hero of influence. I want to ask you to do something. Number one, I want you to pray about Love 928 that's happening next weekend. And you know what I'm not going to do? I'm not just going to sit here and say, go pray, hope it goes well. You know what we're going to do? I want you to grab a hand or a shoulder of someone next to you, and we're going to pray right here, right now for it. Sound good? Oh, yes. Well, in that spirit, let's do it. Yeah. God, I want to ask you, as we just sit here for a moment, we acknowledge the good work that's about to happen next weekend. And we don't want all the signs to point to us. We want them to point ultimately to you. We want people to see that faith, that hope, that love is real. And through our actions, God, through every site that we serve, every place that we're connected to, God, would you use us to be a bridge to people who need to know that you're so good, you're so alive, and you're so real. And I pray, Jesus, you would just absolutely help us to be in the right place at the right time. Give us divine appointments with people so that we can serve this community and build a bridge for them to meet and follow you. We ask this, Jesus, in your name. Amen. I hope you'll spend this week having some special time in prayer about what next weekend could be, that God would give us this opportunity. Now, the next thing I'm going to ask you to do, I don't have some eloquent way of saying it. I don't have some cool way to convince you this is a good idea. All I know is this. Right now, we need about 10,000, not a small number, more dollars to help make Love 928 happen next weekend so that we don't have to turn or close down any sites. And I know there are some of us that we have the means and the ability to give above and beyond what we normally might give to help make that happen. For some of you, it might be the way that you can participate in Love 928 in a special way. I would ask you to just take a minute and ask yourself if you could be a part of us meeting the needs that we still have left in finances to make sure all those sites have what they need and so we don't have to turn any away. Would you pray about that, think about that with you and your family so that we can make this happen? Lastly, this is your weekend to sign up. If you're like me, when you hear about a big thing coming ahead, you go, that's a month away. That's great. I don't blame you for not signing up yet. I'm that person. I normally would sign up on like Friday at midnight kind of a thing, But here's the thing, this is the last chance and we need you to sign up. Let me read to you a couple of things and locations where we need your help. Sunshine Rescue Mission still needs about 10 more people to sign up. Coconino High School on Sunday needs about 12 more people. Summit High School, same amount. Indian Bible College needs just a few, 2 or 3 more people to sign up. Lifeline Ministries out in Winslow, we're getting a carpool, hang out. It's gonna be so much fun. Drive out there. We need a few people to go help with that. There's a wonderful couple, an elderly couple. They've recently gone through some terrible health issues, and we're gonna send them a team. We need just about 3 more people to go help them at their house with some of their needs. Thomas School, a brand new partner this year that we've been able to connect with. They need 6 people to serve at their site. And Williams Elementary School, if you're from Williams or you like to go to Arizona, we're gonna be out there serving at that school. We need some people there as well. This is your time to sign up. We can answer any of your questions at the Info Central in the lobby to try to get you to sign up, but this is it. This is the last call. We need you guys there. And I want to tell you that it is such a gift to be able to know we're going to be serving together. Go online, register.ccf.church. If you're like me, you'll probably forget to do that. It's on the app. Just do it while you're here so you don't forget. I want to encourage you, please, to sign up. You guys, it's going to be so exciting. And all I will say is this, is the band is going to lead us in one more song. And if you remember nothing else, as we sing these songs like this lyric together, that we are broken vessels, that all of our life may not make sense, that we look broken. We don't feel like we have influence or power. Remember that it is not you who's making it happen. It is God who works through broken vessels like us to lead people to him.